where we measured that, this is, on the top is the onset of heart coherence. I invented the concept of heart coherence because I invented how it's measured, realheartcoherence.com. And when you measure, the heart becomes coherent like a laser, which is measurable when you feel love or speak your truth, for example. realheartcoherence.com, you can measure it. It's a lie detector and a love detector. It's a practical tool for measuring lies versus love. It does work. realheartcoherence.com. But here is the measurement made, thanks to Glenn Ryan at my suggestion, that in fact DNA recursively braid implodes when you feel love, when you feel heart coherence. And that embedding process, that implosion process, we call fusion in the blood. And here's a picture of how the short wave embeds on the longer wave in the recursive braiding of DNA, the Celtic knot, as it were. And that's what creates the fractality. It's called superlooping or embedding of the little wave surviving in the bigger wave in your DNA. And that implosion process goes to completion. Your DNA literally implode braids and the plot thickens and your DNA thickens. And suddenly there's a longer wave embedding in your DNA. And that's actually a picture of the evolution of consciousness itself, because the presence of the longer wave embedded in the short wave is not just the definition of the sacred, but it's a definition of ensoulment and long-term memory. So that process of embeddability, that superlooping in DNA, we've been doing these lectures for so many years, we have too many pictures and too little time. But this is from the 7arrows.net. So if you do that recursive braiding in DNA and you braid the braid inside the braid 7 times, thread to string to rope to fat rope, the braid in the braid in the braid on the braid, in response to the phone-on coherent sound of love, coherence in the heart, bliss. The 7th time, the DNA actually turns inside out. It's the 7 arrows, the tetra actually, it's 7 arrows. And that's the opening of the 7th seal and the 7th sign. It's actually beautiful symbolism, but it's good physics. Okay, so before we get carried on, I wanted to give you the practical example of how we apply this to healing, actually, to negentropy, to creating life force. And so for that, I wanted to show you the story of TERAPHI.net. And this is where we're talking about it here. So what I did, this is TERAPHI, TERAPHI.net. Our plasma technology now has centers in 25 countries. It's used around the world. It's a plasma rejuvenation, pain reduction, and much, much more. And a lucid dream inducer by measurement is plasma healing. So this is an example of taking the science we just learned and creating an application which is literally bliss-inducing. Approximately 30% of people who experience this plasma, they sit between plasma, approximately 30% report some sharpening of vision, and approximately 30% report some bliss or euphoria experience. And significant numbers, in addition to pain reduction and circulation, they report lucid dreaming triggered. Now, why would this trigger lucid dreaming? This is a fun introduction, because then once you understand that, you can understand how to take memory through death and how to build stargates and portals. So if you knew the electric field of lucid dreaming, ask Jodie Foster in the movie Contact. Was that an interstellar journey or was it a lucid dreaming? Well, I think it was both. So the physics of how you make a plasma field that is negentropic, which is to say self-organizing, and healing, and creates circulation, which is charge distribution efficient, and reduces pain. It's amazing. Localized pain we can deal with usually in 1 or 2 sessions, and long-term or chronic pain, we don't make medical claims, but in many cases, after say a week or 2 of sessions, we're able to help many people, even with long-term and chronic pain, and many other things. You can read it all, the blog at TERAPHI.net. So how is this an example of what we just taught you about sacred geometry, physics? So basically, remember my equation here. These are if you take my equation, Planck times golden ratio, you get to these frequencies, 2.78, 4.5, 7.29, 11.8, 19, these frequencies right here, which happen to be the Schumann harmonics, almost exactly the Earth's heartbeat, which happen to be almost exactly the brainwave harmonics measurable during bliss, alpha, beta, theta, flameinmind.com, which happened to be the origin of negentropy. Well, one day I was studying this famous French healer and electrical technologist named Antoine Priori, P-R-I-O-R-E, Antoine Priori, who was famous here in France decades ago for healing tens of thousands of cancers. And oh, by the way, this plasma field would cause seeds to grow radically. And by the way, plasma TERAPHI.net is being used by agriculture, especially biodynamics, all over the world just for charging seeds, because the effect on seed growth and plant growth is dramatic. So Priori had the same thing: seed growth, pain reduction, circulation, and healing, and negentropy, rejuvenation. He was famous, but he was spending tens of millions of dollars on each machine, and he did not understand the principle. He did not know what phase conjugation was. He did not even know you needed to use a pair of opposing tubes. However, the moment when I saw, thanks to my team, I saw that the frequencies Antoine Priori used, which he famously got from Wilhelm Reich, Lakhovsky, and Tesla. He got the frequencies from the grandfathers of frequency medicine. And these are the frequencies he used: 3, 10, 32 hertz, and 80 hertz. Now, if you look at these frequencies, you see they're very close to my equation. So as soon as we saw that Antoine Priori had gotten, by luck or by inheriting frequency recipes from Tesla and Reich, that they were close to the pure principle. But once we saw this, we knew what the pure principle was, which they did not, which is phase conjugate negentropy to Planck. So once we figured out the principle, perfected charge collapse, we took that frequency recipe and instead used my frequency recipe and did something else. And that was, we used a pair of opposing tubes exactly 180 degrees out of phase, because that's how you make phase conjugation. In optics, it's how you make lasers meet in a pine cone kissing noses, opposing lasers. And if they meet in a charge permissive media called a phase conjugate mirror, in phase conjugate laser optics, you create negentropy and time reversal. It's measured, it's proven, it's well known. But we made that more broad spectral, and we made the negentropy, the self-organization, more broad spectral, because we then took the low frequencies, this infrasound, modulated the optics by taking a noble gas. In this case, this is a noble gas mixture in here. It's a confidential noble gas mixture, but the noble gases are famous that when you ignite the noble gas, in this case with 500,000 volts in a complex wave, which begins in the megahertz range, 500,000 volts, and the opposing broad spectral pine cones, all the way from megahertz down to infrasound, that low frequency cascade I just showed you. And then we feed that complex wave out of this amplifier here, TERAPHI.net, and we dump it into a bifiller Tesla coil to convert that into a 500,000 volt complex wave. And because it's bifiller, we output that wave into two signals exactly 180 degrees out of phase, perfect mirror image. So where the two pine cones, big pine cones, kiss noses, not just RF, but optical, RF, and infrasound, a huge pine cone, precisely 180 degrees out of phase, all perfectly tuned to Planck. So we get very big pine cones kissing nose, imploding. And so that little point at the center where the two waves fields meet, you have that sweet spot. And there, for example, if you just hurt your finger and you put your finger there, the pain will go away. It's just like, now why does pain go away? Well, it's actually an interesting, it's been measured. Let's see if I can show you. So here is Elizabeth Rauscher, one of the world's most famous physicists and an old friend who died recently, unfortunately. She did an FDA study, and she took these frequencies here, strong magnetic fields, exactly the frequencies that come out of the coil in TERAPHI.net, and she proved in FDA trials they were dramatically pain reducing. Why? The electrical information is because pain reduction is restored compression. Pain is defined electrically as fractality that's bleeding charge because the fractal is broken and compression is broken. So the charge compression is broken, so the charge is bleeding out. So if you restore electrical compression, that is by definition the opposite of pain. You know, if you've got a pain, the first thing you instinctively do is you compress. Well, it turns out that you can apply that compression. And that restores centripetal force, which is the opposite of pain. So we took these frequencies, we modulated the RF and the optics with this frequency cascade. We produced TERAPHI.net. And we can do, as Priory did, we can prove the effect on seed germination and growth and pain reduction. We create self-organization, and we create some bliss, and high percentage of the people get a sharpening of vision. They get out of the field effect and they say, I can see more sharply. It's similar to bliss because it's compression restored. This is the comparison of those frequencies. I don't know if you can see this, probably you can't, but in the bottom, the green harmonics here, 3, 7.83, 14, and 20 hertz. These are the actual frequencies of the Schumann harmonic cascade of the Earth. On top here in blue, these are the frequencies predicted by my equation. 2.78, 4.5, 7.29, 11.8, 19.09. So notice how the Schumann harmonics are very close to perfect implosive charge collapse, the origin of negentropy. So now we can answer the question which Lovelock proposed when he proved the Schumann harmonics with Gaia is self-organizing. It's negentropic. That's the concept of the Gaia hypothesis, which is that Earth itself regulated temperature and pressure and all to make life. Well, how did Gaia become self-organizing? It's proven. That's called the Gaia hypothesis. It's because the Schumann harmonics are implosive and negentropic. And that's why that also identifies the brainwave harmonics. Okay, so you can read more about that story at TERAPHI.net. And here we just talk more about the frequencies of TERAPHI here, which is my equation. These are frequencies of my equation. And this is the medical literature on healing cancer. The most famous frequencies in all of the cancer healing literature is 50 hertz and then 20 hertz. You see how the cancer literature is full of studies showing that these frequencies from my equation are the most famous cancer healing frequencies in all of the medical research literature. Why? Because they're implosive and negentropic and self-organizing. Okay, so we're running toward the end of this conversation, and we're just going to take about another 7 minutes, maybe 5, and we're going to talk about the physics of the electrical design for successful death.
In the sense that if we actually understood what was happening in the plasma, enabling the bliss propagation. Okay, 42, here we go. Are you seeing the TERAPHI plasma here? I hope. Yes, yeah, okay. So what we're doing here is I take this series of frequencies here. These are the frequencies Priory used, Antoine Priory, having healed thousands of cancers, documented by the French government in France. He used 3, 10 hertz, 32, and 80. And when I discovered the principle behind how that worked, which he did not, called phase conjugation, I then perfected the frequency cascade here, exact golden ratio exponents of Planck, which is this cascade called caduceus, and then I modulate that infrasound onto the plasma at 500,000 volts in the megahertz range through a bifilar Tesla coil. Then I trigger the noble gas, which is also phase conjugate, with 180 degrees out of phase from the two opposing directions at 500,000 volts in a megahertz range. And so not only is the RF component phase conjugate to the infrasound, but the optical emissions due to the charge collapse in the triggered plasma is also optically phase conjugate, which means simply a very big pine cone of frequencies kissing noses implosively. And, you know, we're successful with rejuvenation. You can read lots of stories at TERAPHI.net. And it's a very powerful tool. Basically, it's simply charging the aura to implode and become more negentropic. So obviously, it's able to help people with lots and lots of issues. For example, localized pain. We don't make any medical claims, but localized pain, apparently there's thousands of reports we deal with in 1 or 2 sessions routinely. Even long-term and chronic pain, we often help probably more than half, but that takes, a week or 2 of more sessions. But still, if you understand what pain is, which is failure to compress well, if you restore centripetal compression in the plasma, that is the opposite of pain. And by the way, the frequency series coming from the Tesla coil in right here, this black is a bifilar Tesla coil spitting out 500,000 volts. It's the low frequency component of that super strong magnetic field are the exact low frequencies that Elizabeth Rauscher used in her FDA successful trials for pain elimination. And subsequently, when I showed her the equation behind those frequencies, she credited me with inventing the word and the concept of phase conjugate magnetics. So we got phase conjugate magnetics, phase conjugate optics, phase conjugate RF, and phase conjugate infrasound, all imploding the same big pinecone kissing noses. And the reason why I had an excuse to show you these fun pictures here is because this is now a demonstrable lucid dreaming trigger. Hello, literally a remote viewer, yes. What's about? And here, this is a picture of the aura before and after. And these are the infrasound harmonic components. These infrasound harmonic components that drive TERAPHI, you can buy cheaply and separately at flameandmind.com if you choose just the inexpensive Flame and Sound option, the world's most powerful binaural beat trigger for inducing bliss.